My name is Kathleen Fay, and while my mother was explaining to her book club that I worked some boring desk job for the government, I was 3 states away coordinating a multi-agency takedown of an international trafficking network. The irony wasn't lost on me, but then again, nothing about my family ever was. At 42, I'd learned to live in 2 worlds that never touched. In one, I was Supervisory Special Agent Kathleen Fay, running complex investigations out of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division. In the other, I was Katie, the disappointment, the one who never quite figured things out, the daughter who couldn't even explain what she did for a living in a way that impressed anyone at the country club. My family didn't operate on logic or reality, they operated on perception, on the kind of prestige you could name drop at charity galas. My older brother Richard was a corporate attorney whose client list read like a Fortune 500 directory. My younger sister Victoria had married into old money, the kind that came with a hyphenated last name and a seat on museum boards. And then there was me, with my vague government job that I couldn't talk about at dinner parties. "Katie, honey, you really should consider going back to school," my mother had said at Easter dinner, her voice dripping with that particular blend of concern and condescension she'd perfected over the years. "It's never too late for a career change. Victoria's husband could probably get you an interview at his firm. You could be a paralegal or something." I had smiled into my wine glass. 2 days earlier, I had briefed the Director of National Intelligence. "But sure, Mom, paralegal sounded great." The thing about working in federal law enforcement at my level is that secrecy isn't just protocol. It's survival. The cases I worked touched everything from organized crime to domestic terrorism, from public corruption to crimes against children. The less my family knew about what I actually did, the safer they were. But safety, I'd learned, looked a lot like failure through their eyes. "She's been at that job for almost 20 years, I'd overheard my Aunt Patricia say at my nephew's graduation party. "Still living in that little apartment in Virginia. No husband, no children. I just worry she's wasted her life." The little apartment was a 2-bedroom condo in Arlington with a view of the Potomac. I'd paid cash for it 8 years ago. But I let her worry. It was easier than explaining that my government salary, with hazard pay and years of promotions, had left me more financially comfortable than most people realized. It was certainly easier than explaining where I'd really been the previous weekend, not at some boring conference, but managing a crisis situation in Philadelphia that had made national news, though my name would never appear in any article about it. The mockery had patterns, rhythms I'd learned to predict. Family gatherings were performances where everyone played their part. Richard would talk about his latest merger. Victoria would discuss her children's private school achievements. And me? I was the setup. The cautionary tale, the proof that ambition without the right kind of success was just sadness in a pantsuit. "Katie still hasn't figured out how to dress for her age," Victoria had commented last Thanksgiving, eyeing my simple black dress. She was wearing something designer. Something with a label she'd managed to work into conversation 3 times already. "Maybe if you invested in your appearance, you'd meet someone. You can't stay single forever." I'd spent that morning in a ballistic vest, serving a high-risk warrant. The dress was the nicest thing I'd had energy to put on. But it was my mother who'd perfected the art of loving condescension. She never meant to be cruel. That was almost worse. She genuinely believed she was helping, guiding, protecting her lost daughter from a life of mediocrity. "I just want you to be happy," she'd say, patting my hand, "and I worry that this job, whatever it is you do, isn't giving you the life you deserve. No one even knows what you do. How can you build a reputation on something so vague?" Reputation. That word carried so much weight in my family. Reputation was Richard's corner office, Victoria's mansion in Greenwich, my father's membership at the country club. Reputation was something you could see, touch, photograph for Christmas cards. My reputation was classified. The summer wore on, each family interaction another small cut. A comment here about my sad little life, a suggestion there about finally settling down. The assumption, always, that I was somehow less than, less successful, less fulfilled, less worthy of respect. "Katie, you really should let me set you up," my Aunt Patricia said during a phone call in late August. I know this wonderful man, a doctor, very successful. He's a bit older, but beggars can't be choosers, right? I nearly laughed. I'd ended relationships with genuinely good men because the demands of my job made normal life impossible. I'd missed birthdays and holidays, canceled dates for emergencies, and spent nights reviewing case files instead of building something that looked like the life my family understood. The idea that I was desperate, that I should be grateful for scraps of male attention, was almost funny. I appreciate the thought, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral, but I'm fine. Nonsense. You're not getting any younger, and this man is a catch. He's a thoracic surgeon, very prestigious. I've already told him all about you. I closed my eyes. What exactly did you tell him? Oh, just that you work for the government. I kept it mysterious. Men like mystery, she giggled, actually giggled. Let me arrange a dinner. Just come to the house next Saturday. It'll be casual, just family. Everything in me wanted to say no, but I was tired. Not physically tired, though I was that too. Soul tired. Tired of being the family project, the disappointment they needed to fix. And maybe some small part of me thought, it would be nice to have a normal evening. To be just Katie for a few hours, not supervisory special agent Faye with 3 active investigations and a phone that never stopped ringing. Fine, I heard myself say. Saturday. Wonderful. His name is Dr. James Sullivan. He's absolutely charming. And Katie? Her voice dropped to that conspiratorial whisper. Try to look interested. I talked you up, but your vague government job isn't very impressive. Let him do most of the talking. I hung up and stared at my phone. On the screen was an encrypted message from my task force coordinator, a major break in a case I'd been working for 14 months. A case involving a network of medical professionals who'd been exploiting their access to vulnerable patients. A case where Dr. James Sullivan was a person of interest. The next week passed in a blur of late nights and endless coffee. The investigation was reaching critical mass, that point where months of careful work suddenly accelerates toward conclusion. We had enough for warrants, but not enough for arrests. Not yet. We needed one more piece, one more connection, one more thread to pull. He's careful, my lead analyst said, pulling up Sullivan's financial records on screen. Everything looks clean on the surface. Regular income, reasonable expenses, charitable donations. But look at these cash deposits, small enough to avoid triggering reports, but consistent. Every month for 3 years. I studied the timeline. It matched perfectly with patient complaints that had gone nowhere, with missing prescription records, with the kind of systemic abuse that happened when someone with power believed they were untouchable. We need to interview him, I said, but carefully. He doesn't know we're looking at him yet. My junior agent, Marcus Reeves, glanced up from his laptop. When do you want to bring him in? Not yet. Let's keep watching. The moment he knows we're onto him, he'll lawyer up and we'll lose our window. I went home that night thinking about predators in white coats, about the unique betrayal of a doctor who hurt instead of healed. I thought about how people trusted the title, the credentials, the reputation, how reputation could be armor for the guilty. Saturday arrived too quickly. I stood in front of my closet, staring at clothes that fell into 2 categories. Work appropriate, or completely inadequate for a family dinner designed to parade me in front of a catch. I settled on dark jeans and a silk blouse, nice enough to satisfy my mother, forgettable enough to not draw attention. The drive to my aunt's house in Bethesda was 45 minutes of mentally preparing myself for the evening ahead. Smile, nod, let the doctor talk about himself. Endure the knowing looks from my family as they congratulated themselves on helping poor, single Katie. I didn't think about the case. I'd specifically put my work phone on silent, left my badge and weapon locked in my car safe. Tonight, I was off duty. Tonight, I was just the disappointing niece who needed saving. My aunt's house was exactly what you'd expect, a colonial revival with perfect landscaping and enough square footage to house a small village. Cars lined the circular driveway. Through the windows, I could see people moving, gathering. This wasn't the casual family dinner she'd promised. This was a production. Katie, you came! My aunt swept me into a hug that smelled like expensive perfume and judgment. Come in, everyone's here! James is running a bit late. An emergency at the hospital, you know how it is with doctors. So dedicated. The living room was full of familiar faces. My parents, looking proud to be there. Victoria and her husband, looking bored. Richard with his latest girlfriend, a woman young enough to be his daughter. Cousins I barely knew. Friends of the family who'd known me since childhood and still asked what I was up to these days, as if I were perpetually unemployed. Katie! My mother rushed over, already critiquing. You wore jeans? Honey, this is supposed to be a nice dinner. Patricia said casual. Casual doesn't mean sloppy. And your hair, you really should style it more. First impressions matter. I touched my hair, pulled back in the same simple ponytail I wore most days. Practical. Professional. Boring, according to my family. She looks fine, Mom, Richard said, not looking up from his phone. It's not like this is going to go anywhere anyway. Richard, my mother's voice sharpened, that's not helpful. I'm just being realistic. Katie's married to her job. He finally looked at me, and there was something almost pitying in his expression. No judgment. Some people just aren't built for relationships. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, that feeling of being surrounded by people who loved me but didn't know me at all, who couldn't know me. Well, James doesn't know that, my aunt said brightly, and he's coming in blind, which is good. Katie, when he gets here, just try to be charming. Ask him about his work. Men love talking about themselves. Don't mention your job too much, Victoria added, examining her manicure. It's a conversation killer. I work for the government makes you sound like a DMV clerk. She works for the FBI, Victoria, my father said mildly. That's different. Does she, though? Richard asked. I mean, what does she actually do? She's never explained it in a way that makes sense. For all we know, she could be filing paperwork. They were talking about me like I wasn't standing right there. It was a family specialty. I'm sure whatever Katie does is perfectly respectable, my mother said in that tone that meant the opposite. But tonight isn't about work. Tonight is about giving her a chance at happiness, at a normal life. A normal life. The phrase hung in the air like an indictment. As if my life, the life where I fought every day against the worst humanity had to offer, where I spoke for victims who couldn't speak for themselves, where I'd literally saved lives, was somehow abnormal, insufficient, wrong. The doorbell rang. That's him! My aunt practically squealed. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging in slightly. Remember, smile. Be interested. And for God's sake, Katie, let him feel important. She rushed to the door. I heard voices in the foyer, male tones mixing with her enthusiastic greeting. My family arranged themselves like actors in a play, everyone positioned to witness the moment when sad, single Katie met her potential salvation. Dr. James Sullivan walked into the living room, and I felt the world tilt sideways. He was exactly who I'd been investigating. The same face from surveillance photos, the same confident bearing of someone who'd never faced consequences. He was mid-50s, expensively dressed, with the kind of polished appearance that came from years of being trusted, respected, untouchable. His eyes swept the room, smiling, gracious, and then they landed on me. The color drained from his face, his smile froze, then shattered. I watched recognition, then fear, then panic cascade across his features in the span of a heartbeat. Agent, he muttered, his voice barely audible. I didn't know it was you. The room went silent. Every eye turned to look at me, then back to him, then back to me again. Sullivan turned to my aunt, already backing toward the door. I'm sorry, I can't stay. His voice was louder now, unsteady. He practically ran toward the exit, his expensive shoes squeaking on the hardwood floor. The front door slammed. Through the window I watched him jog to his car, fumbling with his keys. My aunt stared at me in horror. What was that? I stood very still, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. The silence was absolute, suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat, could hear someone's glass trembling in their hand. Katie? My mother's voice was small, uncertain. What just happened? I looked at her, at all of them, at their confused faces and their perfect lives built on reputation and appearances. At the family that loved me but had never once asked what I actually did, who I actually was, what I'd actually accomplished. That, I said quietly, was someone who recognized me from work. From the FBI? My father's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Yes. But why would a surgeon? Richard started. Because I'm investigating him. The words came out flat, matter of fact. He's a subject in an active federal investigation. Has been for over a year. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the carpet with a dull thud, dark red liquid spreading like blood across the cream fibers. No one moved to clean it up. My aunt's face had gone from pink to white to a strange grayish color. You're investigating James? But he's a respected surgeon. He's also likely responsible for the systematic abuse of at least 20 patients over the past 5 years. We've been building a case. We're close to making arrests. I kept my voice level, professional. This was just information, just facts. You should probably know that by Monday morning, this is going to be very public. The warrants are ready. We were waiting for one more confirmation, but I think we have enough now. The silence that followed was so profound it felt like the room itself had stopped breathing. You're not? My mother couldn't seem to finish the sentence. You don't just work for the FBI. You're what? Some kind of supervisor? Supervisory special agent, I corrected gently. I run the investigative team. Have for 7 years. Richard's phone slipped from his hands. He didn't pick it up. All this time, my father said slowly, when you said you couldn't talk about work. I meant it. Most of what I do is classified or part of ongoing investigations. I can't discuss it. I've never been able to discuss it. My mother sat down heavily on the couch. The times you missed holidays, that Christmas you couldn't come home. I was in New Mexico, a kidnapping case. We got the child back alive. The year you showed up to Thanksgiving with a black eye and said you'd walked into a door. I'd been assaulted during an arrest. The suspect hit me. My partner broke his arm in 3 places. The memory was distant now, almost clinical. I couldn't tell you that. Victoria was shaking her head, slow and disbelieving. This whole time I thought you were just... A failure? I supplied. I know. Katie, no, my mother started. It's fine, Mom. Really? And the strange thing was, it actually was fine. I felt lighter than I had in years, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had suddenly lifted. You didn't know because I couldn't tell you. That's not your fault. But my aunt's voice broke, we treated you like, oh God, all those things we said. The room was full of faces I'd known my whole life, all of them looking at me like they'd never seen me before, like I was a stranger wearing familiar skin. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Work? It would always be work. I need to take this, I said, and then I need to go. This evening has complicated things professionally. I stepped into the hallway, answered the call. It was Marcus. Boss, we've got a problem. Sullivan just called his lawyer. He knows something's wrong. I know. Long story. How fast can we move? We can have the warrants executed by midnight if we push. Do it. I'll be there in an hour. I hung up and turned to find my entire family standing in the hallway, watching me. You have to go, my mother said. It wasn't a question. Yes. To arrest him, the doctor. Among others, it's a network, not just one person. My father stepped forward. He looked older suddenly, tired. Katie? Kathleen, all these years, we had no idea. The things we said were based on what you knew, which was nothing because I couldn't tell you anything. I grabbed my jacket from the coat rack. I'm not angry. I stopped being angry a long time ago. But you must have been, Victoria said softly. All those comments, all that condescension, you just took it. I paused at the door, really looking at her for the first time in years. My perfect little sister with her perfect life, looking at me now like she was the one who'd failed. It was easier than the alternative, I said. Easier than trying to explain that I'd chosen this life knowing what it would cost. That I'd decided a long time ago that this work was worth being misunderstood, worth being the family disappointment. "You were never," my mother began. "Mom, I was, but that's okay. Disappointment is just the gap between expectation and reality." I smiled, and it felt real for the first time all evening. "You expected one life from me. I built a different one. That's not failure, that's just choice." I left them standing in the hallway, their perfect party destroyed, their perfect assumptions shattered. By the time I reached my car, I was already mentally shifting gears, moving from Katie back to Supervisory Special Agent Faye. The woman who walked into that house wasn't quite the same one leaving it. Maybe because something had been revealed. Or maybe because I'd finally stopped protecting them from the truth. My phone rang again, the director himself. "Faye, I heard we're moving on Sullivan tonight." "Yes, sir, the situation required acceleration." "Understood. I want you to lead the arrest personally." "Sir, given that he recognized me." "That's exactly why. He ran from you, Kathleen. Let's make sure he understands he can't run far enough." I hung up and started the engine, watching my aunt's house grow smaller in the rearview mirror. Inside, my family was probably still standing in shock, trying to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the reality of who I'd always been. The arrest went down smoothly. Sullivan was in custody by 2 a.m., along with 4 others. The evidence was overwhelming. By dawn, it would be national news. Respected surgeon arrested in multi-state abuse case, FBI task force, months of investigation. My name wouldn't be in any of the articles, it never was. But my family would know. They would understand, finally, what I'd been doing all those years. I was figuring things out. All those times I was vague about work, all those missed holidays, all those moments they'd pitied me. I got home as the sun was rising, exhausted but satisfied. On my phone were 17 missed calls from family members and 1 text from my mother. "I'm so sorry. I'm so proud. I wish I'd known. Can we talk?" I looked at it for a long moment, then typed back. "There's nothing to apologize for, and yes, we can talk, but Mom, I'm still going to be vague about most of what I do. That's not going to change." Her response came immediately. "I know, I understand now. I love you, Katie. I'm sorry it took this long to see you." I set the phone down and looked around my little apartment, the one they'd pitied me for. The morning light was streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the Potomac. The walls held commendations I'd never shown anyone, photos with colleagues who'd become family. Memories from a career that had cost me everything they valued and given me everything I needed. Somewhere in Georgetown, a respected surgeon was sitting in a federal holding cell, his reputation in ruins. Somewhere in Virginia, victims would wake up to news that someone had finally listened, finally believed, finally acted. And somewhere in between, a woman named Kathleen Faye, Katie to some, agent to others, was exactly where she was supposed to be. The mockery had stopped. But more importantly, I'd stopped caring whether it did or not. That was the real